Welcome to the next episode of Sisto Says. I'm the president and CEO of Design 2147. We're an expediting company and code and consulting company here in New York City. Today, my guest is Ken Wille of KOW Building Consultants. Welcome aboard, Ken.
Great, Sisto. Thanks for having me.
It's great. So, Ken, we met at a show, which is part of things I love to do, which is go to different conferences here in New York City in our industry. And I saw your booth. I came over and I introduced myself. And lo and behold, you're on the show, and premier consulting firm that's been around a long time. So tell us a little bit about the firm. Tell me a little bit about, I understand your dad started the firm and you came along. So tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so, again, thanks for having me, Sisto. And, the fact that we just met, that's one of the things I love about New York City development and construction, that you and I have both been doing this 30 plus years. We're on construction sites. We're in meetings. We're at the building department.
And we know of each
We're
other.
at the green screen back in the days. But we just met. And right. I kind of love that this city is so big. There's so many things going on. There's always someone new to meet. And there's always something new to learn. So it's great. It's good to meet a new old friend.
Right. And you see our name, we see your name, but we never put the people together.
For a long time.
People are together.
You got it. So my father started the company in 1978. I joined him in 98. There were 5 of us. There's now about 50 of us.
Wow.
And my brother, Kevin Wille, came on about 10 years ago to kind of really help us grow and do the business development marketing. In a nutshell, most of our work is for the financial institution world. Plan and cost reviews, requisition inspections, building inspections. But in recent decades, we've branched out into a lot of sustainability consulting, phase 1 environmental work, and we've expanded out into different areas, but still our bread and butter is the 5 boroughs.
Wow. So it sounds like the company's grown a long way.
It has.
So, we've been around since 1987. So we're pedaling on our 37th year. And you're absolutely right. It's so incestuous, the construction world we're in, but yet people know the brand, but they don't know the people. So I've seen your name on a million pieces of paper over the years, right? And I know you've seen us, that we've reviewed some documents and drawings that, when the banks send you requisitions or whatever, our name is on it. And lo and behold, I'm walking through this show on affordable housing, and I see your booth there, and I came over and we chatted, and I asked you to come on the show, and we went out to lunch and we talked, and we had great conversation about a lot of people that we know. And one of the topics that's hot to trot right now is Local Law 97. Mm-hmm. And, as we got into it, I saw your eyes light up. You have a passion for it. It's something that your firm does. So, there's some news from the building department this week that we're going to talk about. But basically, in one of the previous shows with David West, he talked about the architectural side of it, the zoning side of it. And, now today I want to hear your side of it. What are banks thinking about it? How are people going to fund these changes? Where are they going to get the money? Are they going to pay the fines, or are they going to do the work? So, I know you're on the ground with that. It's easy to make a law because, on this show, we love good, solid laws that are going to keep people safe, make the environment better, keep people that live in the building, people outside the building. Tragedies happen every day, unfortunately. So, give us a little bit of the, that whole piece that, it's a great law, but how do people fund this? How are they going to do it? How are they going to make the environment better without spending an arm and a leg and having to do it in a short duration of time?
So that's certainly the not $100,000, the $1 million question. Yes,
right.
So Local Law 97 of 2019, also called Local Law 97, is one of the greater, greener buildings and the sustainability laws that were passed a few years ago by the city. Some of the other ones include a new green sustainability code. One of them regards warehouse lighting upgrades, but the big one, energy audits, of course, every 10 years, but the big one is Local Law 97 that everyone's talking about. In a nutshell, what it says is as follows. Starting with next year, 2024, every building over 25,000 square feet, or if you have 2 buildings on a lot that are 50 and et cetera, has to prove and show each year their CO2 emission per square foot, and then it's compared to a peer group. So we're not comparing a warehouse to a hotel to a
Correct, 'cause that
condo
would be
buildings.
unfair.
Correct. And based on how you do to your benchmark or your peer group, you're either okay, or if you're above the cap, you're going to pay penalties that are in line with how above the cap you are.
So it'll be based on percentages. So if you're over your peers by a certain percentage, then they're going to implement a fine based on those percentages.
Correct. So, for example, one of the buildings that was used when this was rolled out in 2019 was actually just before 2019 that we started to get information, and there have been some updates since. One of the examples used was a 1,000,000 square foot building. If you
That's
have
a big building.
So if you have a 1,000,000 square foot building that is 10% over in 2024, they're going to pay about $230,000 a year in penalties.
Wow.
Here's the real bad news. In 2030,
30, that's where the big ones hit.
it's going to turn to $1.2 million a year in penalties. Now, the reason is that when it was first rolled out, the city had a 3-tiered look ahead. 2024, and then more demanding demands in 2030, and then 2035. There are now 5 tiers.
Oh, okay.
So it starts with 2024, and then it proceeds every year ending in a 5 or 0. 2030, 35, 40, 45.
So they pushed it way out.
Correct.
And they pushed it out 25 years.
So 2050 is carbon neutrality. That's when you're to be carbon neutral. And just
That's when you're at basically almost at zero.
correct. And there's 2 things here that sometimes get mixed up. There's building or energy efficiency,
Right.
and there's CO2 output. They're 2 different things.
Right.
Efficiency regards input and output of energy.
Right.
And you know that from anything you do, you could have a furnace from 35 years ago that's 80% efficient, meaning energy in to energy out, and you replace it with a 95% efficient. It's a lot more efficient as far as what you're getting for your input. This regards not energy efficiency.
It's CO2.
Correct. And that's the big question is how are buildings going to do this? The penalties are going to be great. And actually, when the building department and the city looked at the penalties, they realized if you make it a slap on the wrist, you're not incentivizing people
Of course.
to do the work. There was some talk I heard, although I don't know how you would do this, but that when they actually came up with the penalties, the idea was that it would be in the ballpark of what it would take to make your building compliant. That was kind of the idea.
Which would make sense. So,
Correct.
So let's use an example.
Correct.
Your firm goes in, I own a building, and it's more than 25,000 square feet, right? And I say to you, okay, this is the equipment we're using. This is our CO2 emissions. In 25 years, I need to be at 0. I can go to 0 now. You would say, well, you could go to 0. It would cost you X amount. This is what you would gain, right? Because you're probably using more efficient equipment, right?
Correct.
So you're going to get savings, you're going to get there, and you won't get penalized. And it should be close to a 1-to-1 representation is what you're saying. Now, if that's true, that would be awesome. If I knew I had to spend $1 million today, by 2050, I'd go and try to find the money now and make it 0 so I don't have to worry about penalties, and I have a savings because I'm using more efficient equipment to reach that neutrality.
That's the idea, is that you invest in your building long term. You're going to save money over the long term. You're going to be compliant and avoid penalties over the long term. That's the concept. What's interesting is when you see a building that's out of compliance, and it's not a $5,000 penalty, it's a $400,000 penalty,
Sure.
that gets your attention.
Sure.
There have been people that have said, well, this is just a money grab. But actually, there's been talk I've heard, although it's just kind of in the ether, that the building department may actually let you apply the penalty to your retrofit. So, for example, if it's
that would make sense, right? Because
and talk about spurring the economy, you're now doing roofing and insulation and windows and lighting,
Sure.
and that's what you want. Is you want to say, I'm going to do this. Whatever
not
reason,
because you're going to penalize me, but it's because I'm going to have a better building. It's better for the environment, and you're not going to penalize me, and I could use that credit.
correct. And you just put $400,000 into the pockets of subs and plumbers and mechanics,
Sure.
which is exactly what we want to do, is get that work going on for that reason. So that's one of the things that's been discussed. The interesting thing is you could easily find this, if you just Googled it, there's a calculator you could go in right now and you put in a building. So just choose a building like we just chose, for
Now,
example.
where is the starting point for the neutrality? Is it how many square feet and what use?
Okay, so So it's going to
Because it's
happen.
not going to be like 1 and 2 family houses. It's not going to be small little.
No, it's over 25,000
Over
square feet.
25,000,
Yes, it's over 25,000 square feet.
Gross.
Correct. And you need to look at only 2024 right now.
Right.
There was an amendment that came out last week, a bulletin, that if you are over 40% for your 2024 and you want to apply for a exemption for 2030, you could do that. So there's some movement. I will give the credit to this idea that there have been discussions and stakeholders that have said, hey, wait a minute, that might not work.
Right. And by the way, you could go to Design 2147's website. We did a newsletter. It's posted on our website. If you're interested and need to apply for a waiver, there are links there with the DOB. So it was a topic that we covered as
Correct.
well.
Yep.
And having you here, Ken, and explaining it, is exactly what I think the audience gets a lot more out of it, seeing a visible expert, seeing someone who does it day to day. Because sometimes when we read a newsletter or it's hard to interpolate, what the city really is asking and what they're saying. And it seems like they understand now that it may not be exactly the way they thought it would work out in 2024. So they've made some small changes, which hopefully will benefit the city as well as the owners of the buildings.
Correct. And of course, like anything, if I'm looking to build a building and I've got some needs, you're on my speed dial to say, how should we proceed? If you have a need for this, you talk to an energy or a consultant that does this.
Correct.
The one thing I would say for the viewers is that there is the calculator. You could just Google Local Law 97 calculator. You could put in an address today, and it'll tell you if it's above 25,000 square feet and it's on that
If it's
grouping.
on that group, right.
It'll tell you how it's going to do for 2024.
So they
and
projected it.
It's all right on there. It's all
Wow.
right on there, which it brought in the information from the energy audit. So you can see how am I looking today, and then
So a building owner could really already know where he is and where he needs to get to,
Correct.
or he or she.
correct.
Oh, that's crazy. That's
Correct.
great.
And just to put it in context, so the question is, there's just north of 1 million buildings in New York City.
Right.
Most are small.
Yeah.
So the question is, what kind of numbers are we talking about here? So there's about 50,000, just over, buildings that are subject to this over 25,000 square feet rule. About 50,000. The Real Estate Board of New York just did a study, and they determined in 2024, if nobody does anything else, about 4,000 buildings are going to pay about $200 million in penalties.
Wow.
Okay, so that's 4,000 buildings, $200 million in penalties.
By 2030,
you ready for
the
this
number
one?
goes through the roof.
By 2030, again, if no one did anything, it would be about 14,000 buildings and $900 million. Wow. So you're talking about a lot of money, a
almost
lot
$1
that's
billion.
at stake. And to answer one other question you had in your comment is, we've done 2 seminars recently for bricks and mortar banks,
Right.
financial institutions that have said, we're getting worried about this.
Well, and so that's a really great point, Ken. So I'm a building owner, right? We own a couple of buildings. We own the building we're in. We own a building in the Bronx, right? Less than 25,000. But if it was more than 25,000, right? And I need to go out and fund this. You go to get money right now. I mean, not to pick on the banks, but we own a bunch of buildings. We own a personal residence. We have, other residents that we own. Every time I've gone to do something personally, it's a process that's grueling. So, and on the commercial side right now, it's even harder. We have properties, that we hear all the time. Oh, I have this property. It's a retail property. I just had it appraised for $4 million. It's paid off. I want to take out $3 million. And they're like, oh, we'll give you $1 million. The banks give you 25% of the value, not 60 or 80%. Yeah. So my question is, banks being concerned about that, well, they should be concerned about it, because for you to meet this criteria, you need capital. And if you don't have the capital, then now you're going to have to pay the penalties. And then you're going to pay the penalties, but you still didn't do the work. Well, you get to 2030 and you start to see 14,000 buildings, of which maybe 7,000 comply. Well, those other 7,000 buildings are on the verge of bankruptcy.
You're absolutely right. And that's why, like everything else, you want to start early, find the right professional, sit down. What am I looking at?
And come up with a plan.
And come up with a plan. As far as the financial institutions are concerned, there are some ways to fund the work you're going to do. There are PACE funds. There are a number of different AMIP and NYSERDA, and there's different incentives and programs to get you some monies.
Right, but so is there like, do they have like programs where you can get low interest rates to help if you're going to do your roof or you're going to do your lighting? I know that in a lot of other states besides New York State, if you're going to do this, they give you tax credits. They give you something to help reduce that burden, but more importantly, they give you a low interest loan. The banks went up another, 25, points yesterday, right? 0.25. So again, money's getting more expensive. So it's not getting better for these building owners. So do they roll the dice and wait till later on as they get closer to 2030? Well, that's a huge gamble.
So it is a huge gamble. The good news is that for a lot of the buildings we've looked at, the larger buildings that have very little or no debt, or usually it's very little, it's attractive to a bank because let's take construction loans, for example. Construction loans are very, very risky.
Yes.
If I loan you money to buy a car, a boat, or a house, or a jet ski,
got something.
and you don't pay the bills, I'm coming to take it. I'm sending the repo man in to get it. Construction loans are very risky. Where in what other world can you show a hole in the ground and say, loan me $80 million?
Right.
So there's a lot of risk with that. So the less, and everything for the banks, it's never a no. It's a matter of, is the risk profile set up so that they'll say yes?
Right.
And I could bet that the Jets are going to win. Well, I can't say that now. We have Aaron Rodgers. You could make some really risky bet, which is fine as long as you know that the risk and reward are commensurate.
Correct.
Okay. So when it comes to a bank, if you say I'm going to develop my first building and it's $100 million and I've got to do underpinning and it's a deep pile system and I got the MTA, they're hearing risk, risk, risk.
Sure.
You've never done this before. That's risk.
Right.
Maybe you had a bankruptcy 20 years ago. There's risk pieces there.
Yeah.
But when you have a built building, a CO'd building that's occupied, there are a lot
and
more.
there's a rent flow and
correct.
Right. There's tangible things that they can hedge their risk.
Correct. And they're more willing to talk about you saying, look, I need $3 million. I'm going to do a roof and I'm going to do a boiler and I'm going to do windows. So the conversation is better than if you were
building out of the
if you
ground.
had no asset,
Right.
if you had no collateral there to apply against the debt. All the banks that we work for have some sort of loan to value ratio, for example, when they do construction loans. And so if your total value is 100 and they're willing to loan you 70, their LTV is 70.
Correct.
What's interesting is they move that LTV based on their risk appetite.
Sure.
So before the Great Recession, for example, we had I'm not going to name names, we had a very big, important client, and they said, good news, we just increased our LTV to 95. And I said, this is just before the Great Recession, not having any kind of crystal ball. What happens if you lose 10% value overnight? And they said, well, this never happened in commercial real estate in New York City. And then the recession hit.
Right.
The next time I talked to them, their LTV was 50.
Right. They went from 95 to 50.
If you didn't have cash, you weren't building.
Right.
But they're talking to people that had the right risk profile, and that's got to make sense for them. So when it comes to doing the local law work, you're more attractive as in you have an asset, but we're talking about big dollars.
So take us through that for a minute. So, you've talked about roof, you talked about windows, we talked about facade. So I have a 25,000 square foot warehouse here in Brooklyn, and I come to you and I say, hey, Ken, you know what? I'd like you to do a study for us. Tell us where we need to do all our upgrades here. This is where I am. This is where I need to be by next year, or even, I'm very conservative. I'd like to know where I need to be in 2030. So take us through that process. What is the process for that?
Okay, so that's really the best question, right? Where do we go from here? So the first thing is, let's see what we could find out. We do the inspection and the energy audit. We look at your energy use. We look at the calculator. Then we put together a model and determine if you do just a roof, Sisto, here's the path and compliance. Right. If you do a roof and you do air sealing and we'll put in all those pieces to see which option is the best fit.
What are the basics? What are the basic components of a building that you're really looking at? It is mostly the envelope and the equipment that's being used to heat it and air condition it?
Right. So this is, again, not about efficiency. It's about CO2 output. So this is where we're burning natural gas or oil. So what this regards is typically the equipment you have and how tight your building is.
Right.
So a passive house now has gained a lot of popularity. Passive house's concept is, let's build the building absolutely air sealed tight.
Right.
Let's put in minimal heating and cooling, and let's control airflow from a health standpoint and have a very efficient building. So if you consider that concept with an existing building, that's the idea. So things like roof, windows, insulation, air sealing, mechanical equipment,
So getting
heat,
it
hot
as
water,
tight as you can get it.
and getting that equipment. One of the biggest ones is lighting.
Lighting, yeah.
So for example, we all know a T12 bulb is that 1 inch, 4-footer double bulb you see in a lobby or a corridor.
Right.
We don't see a lot of those anymore, but if I go into a building and I see that and I say to a super, you got a double T12 there, when is that on? And they say 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365. I say, okay, if we replace that with an LED, you save 89% right off the bat in your energy use.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. Your lighting, your payback in your lighting is months or a few years, not 20 or 30 years. So there's different avenues, like any complex problem, it's not one solution,
Particular thing.
right? It's a number of things we're going to look at, lay it out, and decide what's the best route for the building.
So when you have a gas-fired unit or you have an oil-fired boiler, I mean, what is the real solution? Is it to rip it out and go to electric? I mean,
So there's a lot of different options nowadays. Equipment has just come leaps and bounds in my career as far as options that are out there.
Sure.
There's anything from ice heat systems to heat pump systems to cogeneration, where you heat water, produce steam that turns a turbine and creates your own electricity.
Right.
And then
We've
gains
done a
your,
couple of cogens.
So you've got some really interesting options out there. For Local Law 97 compliance, you also have the option of renewables, your solar panels, et cetera. And if you could show that you're bringing clean energy from a renewable source in or connected to the New York City system,
Right.
that all counts as credit. You get that REC, that renewable energy credit. So it's not a straight
rip it out
calculation.
and put it in.
Correct.
Right.
There's different
so
pieces.
if you have oil and you're using, a bio oil or an oil, a synthetic oil that,
Right.
they're gonna make now.
Right.
I mean, that's an ROC, right?
Right.
Oh, got it.
The one caveat I would say is there are some carve-outs that don't have to comply with Local Law 97. City-owned buildings,
Yeah, of course.
houses of worship, and city, of course. And the other one is affordable housing. If greater than 35% of your units are income or affordable housing,
yeah.
then you don't have to comply. And instead, and this is the key, there's a 13 bullet point prescriptive list that you can do for compliance. And it's really not a lot of work. It's like making sure thermostats, controls, set points,
Right.
everything's set right,
Right.
commissioned.
So that there's no waste.
Right, exactly right.
And there's no abuse.
Right. The only thing you would have to do is exposed insulation piping gets insulated, but it's really a much easier path to compliance.
Sure.
You meet those 13 things.
And a lot of our business and your business is in that world, right?
Correct.
Because we do a lot of straight affordable, 100%.
Correct.
They're community facilities with sleeping accommodations, a big market, and we consider ourselves experts in this field because we've done it for 37 years. We're probably on 25 projects right now that are straight 100% affordable.
Right,
You know,
right.
For whatever, for all different non-for-profits. And I think, I always, in my personal opinion, because this is sometimes about opinions, right? A lot about your own and mine, is that, some of these type of community facilities just can't afford it.
Right.
I mean, they're lucky that they can provide the services to the people. And I always get concerned, and it's a topic that I do speak a lot about when I'm out, away from this mic, to other people, that, there has to be a balance because, when community facilities calling and they're like, oh my God, we got hit with all this stuff, we can't afford it. And a lot of times we do it pro bono because we actually feel bad for them because they're fundraising to get more rooms and more beds for people that don't have a place to stay, or battered women, battered, children. They don't have a place to go, but yet there's all these laws that come out,
Right.
and then they're getting hit with all these penalties. So I'm glad that they put something in place for that, so that they can meet certain criterias, but they're not as stringent as the other type of buildings.
Correct. And then the other thing that's nice is you do those 13 bullet points, and then you file for your compliance once, and you're good. You don't have to file every year.
Right.
So they made it pretty friendly for the user, which is the affordable housing building, to say, look, we don't have the rents to generate to do all this work. So they said, well, let's just tighten up everything you do have, do some pipe insulation, and it's a good path to compliance.
Sure.
You know, the other thing is, of course, and you see this every day as do I, we truly do have an affordable housing crisis.
I was yesterday. I was at the New York City Building Congress,
yeah.
and Governor Hochul spoke, and every day they're falling. You know, Lou Madigan was here in March on the show, and he said they predicted they were 30,000 apartments short every month.
Yeah.
Now they're talking 50,000. I mean, every day it just gets worse. And, well, listen, you know, you're in the business of dealing with banks. 421A and not having these tax credits, no developer in New York City or anywhere else in America is going to build apartments for free for the city. They're just not. That's not their job. If you want free apartments, you need someone who's a philanthropist who wants to just take their money and build apartments for free. And that's not the way the economy works in New York City. It never worked that way. You have to have incentives. So right now, they're talking about extensions, they're talking about this, but, you know, also, again, previous people on the show, Ashley Thompson Donato was on the show, and she works, you know, for Jim Capolino's office. And she said, Sisto, I was in government. It takes time.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're already past June. You know, in the affordable world, we know June's the big day because that's when the budgets come out. And you got to wait a whole year for the next thing to happen. You know, and we have a lot of projects that we got approved that just haven't even gotten out of the ground yet. And they're probably never going to, they're not, even though they filed the plans and they got a 421A, they just can't get the money.
Yeah.
They can't get the money, and you know, people were afraid of the cost of construction. And the truth of the matter is, you know, from I had lunch yesterday with Andrew Peters from Curry and Brown, and we talked about construction costs. And he said, Sister, believe it or not, you know, people are projecting it was going to be 12%. It's 4 or 5%. So the cost of construction didn't go up what everyone projected. The problem is people can't get money to build.
That's exactly right. And, you know, the construction costs, what's interesting is we just came off the last few years of just this volatile supply chain, COVID. Right. Okay. So we're now in a more normal phase of construction costing. And that does help the banks. Right. That does help the banks, because what banks don't like is surprises.
Volatility.
They don't like surprises.
Nobody does.
You could tell me something's $10 today and $15 in a year, and as long as that's accurate, they're listening.
They're fine with that, right?
But
when it goes from $10 to $40, then
yeah, right.
Nobody's happy with that.
Right. What's interesting is, you know, I remember not that long ago that we would finish affordable housing projects, and someone would want to live there that would qualify, income, whatever it might be, disability,
the AMI.
and they'd fill out a piece of paper, an application.
Right.
That's all electronic now. So you now can click if you want this building or that building or this building. And we had a building a couple years ago finished up. I think it was about 95 units. And I said to the developer, how many applicants did you have? And he said, over 20,000 qualified. So that means not 20,000 that could live there and qualified. Right. So you want to talk about a supply and demand problem. There's a huge gap. The other thing I would say, which is really interesting and is not bad, but it's not good, and that is there are a few developers, I can name 3 off the top of my head, that if you said to me 20 years ago, oh, they're going to do projects outside New York City, I'd say, no way. They're now they're doing a project in Jersey City. We're looking at a project in upstate in Newburgh.
Yeah.
They're looking outside the 5 boroughs to find a structure that works for their costs.
There's no doubt. I 37 years, when quality housing came out, when 421A came out, and we finally got to the point where, hey, look, if you're going to build some apartments, we're going to give you some tax credits, but you're going to give us 20%. You're going to give us 80%. We've done some buildings that are 80% affordable, 20% market rate. We've done them 100%. We've done 0. We've done condos, right? And a lot of those developers came to New York City because there was tax incentives for them to build here. And not only when they were done, the value of their building continually, their asset grew.
Right.
Now, those developers flat out have said to me, Sisto, I'm in Philly, I'm in Nashville, I'm in Long Island again, where they never wanted to build in Long Island because the planning boards were difficult. Where here in New York, you have an as-of-right building, you go to the bank, you get your money, you build 60 stories, you put 600 apartments in, you're not in front of a planning board. You get your approval in 6 months to a year, But now, we've been called, and even our own office, Ken, we've expanded our services. We do code and, not really zoning work, but code work and expediting outside of New York City.
Exactly.
We're on a couple of jobs in New Jersey right now. We're up in New Paltz. We're up in Westchester. Same thing for us. If our developers aren't building here, we can't turn our back on our clients that have worked with us for 30 years and they call us up and say, hey, we got a project up in Westchester, will you do it? We go, nah, that's not really our thing. So we've expanded. And I think that that's where I think that New York City government needs to see that the money is flowing outside of us instead of inside. And somehow, some way in this next year, that has to change.
I think there's actually some positives too. What's interesting is as a service company, our company and your company, we don't select where the buildings are built and where the
Correct.
project. We react to where would you like me to bid on that job.
Right.
And what's interesting is when they rezoned Williamsburg,
Yeah.
I still remember the day I was in Queens driving around doing inspections and I heard on the radio when Bloomberg said, we want to sit down and talk about maybe rezoning the Williamsburg waterfront area, values went up 35%.
Right.
And it ended up getting rezoned and inclusionary, and we could see what's happened. And when I lined up one day our projects and our job numbers to the L line, we literally followed the L line
God.
east. Yeah.
Tremendous.
Right. So what's interesting is if you said to me, what are the areas of the 5 boroughs that you're doing work in? We have a ton going on in the Bronx.
Oh, ton in the Bronx.
And you
Us
can
too.
still find land in the Bronx.
Yes.
We're doing a lot in South Queens.
Yeah.
A lot in the Rockaways.
Yeah.
If you haven't been to the Rockaways,
Oh, the
in a
Rockaways
few
is
years,
booming.
go
Booming.
down there on a sunny day.
Beautiful.
You can go to a surf shop. There's a hotel. Get a
Beautiful.
nice bite to eat. It's incredible. So there's some activity
Right,
going on.
But can I agree with that?
Yeah.
But the problem that we're having now is that was the old news. The old news. I think that everyone who's been on the show, and we've done a great job with the
Right.
show. We're on episode 14, I believe, and everyone has one fear. The positive is there are great things that are getting done around the city, and I agree with you. There's many neighborhoods, the Grand Concourse in the Bronx has just been completely revitalized. It's beautiful. I drive through it on my way home to Connecticut. Places in Westchester, New York City, everywhere. The fear that everyone has is the pipeline. Without the 421A, David West said he used to do 10 projects a year. They have zero. Not one job that someone's looking down the road. It's either a condo. The 421A is gone. The office to residential conversion hasn't, it's a lot of fluff, but it really doesn't there's only a handful being done. We're not bidding a lot. We have one, we're bidding another one now. But when you don't have the pipeline, that's what really scares a lot of people. It's not because the land is too expensive. It's not because construction costs are too expensive. There's no tax incentive. And when they go to the bank and they look at that and the banks tighten up because there's no tax incentive, when they put it out, the numbers just don't work.
So the good news is there are some pieces that are still work, like the 4% and the 9% LIHTC program is still active. But you are 100% right. If 421A doesn't come back in some sort of fashion, projects that should be done and would serve the neighborhood, the stakeholders, the residents, the city, are dead in the water. They're just not going to happen.
And the biggest problem that we're going to have, to be honest with you, that I've seen back in the 90s, which was you have all these sites. They demoed them. They put in a couple of piles. They did a portion of their foundation to get grandfathered in for the 421A.
Mm-hmm.
They've been vacant since last June. Mm-hmm. We're on a year already. 50% of the jobs we did, they never started.
Right.
So they're all waiting to see what happens. Now, either they're trying to sell it, they're trying to get rid of it. we're going to have empty sites again, where you're going to be driving around going, oh my God, that's such an eyesore. It's a health problem. They're just everywhere. Go along the Gowanus. Yeah, there's great buildings going up, vacant sites everywhere because nobody started the projects.
Right.
They're trying to flip them. So, that's one of the things that I think that, everyone talks about it, but when you go to the communities and you meet with some of the community board members, that's what there was. They're like, oh yeah, they're going to build all these things. Okay, now they're not going to build it. So now we got junkyards all over our neighborhood with fences with holes in them, and weeds growing through it. So, I never like to put anybody on the spot, but the best part about having a podcast is I get to ask all the guests some questions, and then we get to bring them back.
Yeah.
So they all laugh.
Right.
And I always say, it's always your opinion.
Right.
And it's always my opinion, right? We don't talk, some things we can talk fact, right? You gave us great facts today about, a local law 97. So thank you very, very much. Very educational to me. I'm sure it's educational to all our guests. But Andrew Peters had the greatest line. I love Andrew from Curry and Brown. He says, I'm a cost estimator. Everybody wants to look in the rearview mirror and say, well, this is what happened before, so that they could project what's happening going forward. And it's true. He says, I try to focus on what I see going forward.
What's down the road?
What's down the road. So I'm going to leave you with a question, because you get to come back on the show, right? So in 6 months or so, or actually right after, the first portion of Local Law 97 comes, I'd love for you to come back and give us some statistics and give us some information. And my question would be so where do you see sustainability, Local Law 97 going forward in the next year? What's the traction? What do you think's going to happen? So we could, at least gauge a little bit what you feel, because you do it every day.
So this is just my opinion. I do think that the city's going to have some sort of extension, or there's going to be a reprieve period where they're not going to be able to just drop these penalties, because I believe that a lot of building owners are saying, look, we're doing our best. We're engaging an architect. We're putting it out to bid. We're getting the work done.
But it takes time.
It takes time. We got to line up the financing. We have to get approvals. This is not something you could do overnight. We want to do it safely, etc. So I think that there's going to have to be a real world enforcement to that piece. That's my guess.
And I think the city will adjust to that.
I do as well. I do as well. I think that 2024 will go smoother than a lot of people think, but 2030 is not that far away.
Correct.
I'll put it in context. By 2050, they want carbon neutrality. Now, 2050 seems like it's a million years away. It's the same as today back to 1996.
Right.
So I think 96 was last year. I remember 96. It's going to be here quickly.
Yeah.
So I think that 24 will go better than a lot of people think, but right on the heels of
30.
it is 30.
Okay,
and so
great.
you have to be ready.
Well, Ken, thank you for joining us. You were an incredible guest. Thank you so much. If you need any questions related to Local Law 97, Ken's information will be on the YouTube site, as well as ours, Design 2147, Code Consultants, Expediters, anything around the world in New York City. So pleasure, Ken. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sister. I appreciate it.